All right, so this is the examples that we're going to do today. It's called 10.4, but actually 10.4 starts down here where it says solve each equation. So this is 10.4. So again, this is not on your quiz. So the 10.4 lesson will not be on the quiz. However, these two problems up here at the front, at the top, these are 10.3, section 10.3. So that you will see on the quiz. So let's go ahead and just review 10.3. And then also, if you have any questions about all of the homeworks or any of the sections of 10.3, 10.2, or the original 10.1, then you can let me know today. But first, let's do some practice on 10.3, which are the cube root graphs. Number 1, write a cube root function to describe the graph below. So this is called a cubed root graph because it's sideways like this. And the way we're going to write it is with y equals a cube root of x minus c plus d. Again, we're going to ignore the b value because with the cube roots, it doesn't matter whether you do like the a value on the outside or the b value on the inside. It's going to be the same, but it's always easiest to just do an a value. So now what we're going to do, c comma d is your inflection point. So let me write it down one more time here. C comma d, that's the inflection point. So let's start by plugging in our inflection point. If you look at the graph, the inflection point would be this dot here at -2, -3, because that's where the graph is changing from concave up to concave down. So I'm going to plug in my inflection point for c comma d first. Y equals a cube root of x minus -2, so let's put plus 2. And then minus 3. So you will be asked something like that on the quiz. You have to give me the equation based on a graph. Now I need you to solve for a. So the way you would solve for a is by plugging in the other point that was given, 6, -5. Plug that in for x and y. So in other words, put -5 equals, because that's the y value, a cube root of 6 plus 2 minus 3. And now you would just solve for a to get your final answer. So I'm going to do plus 3. -5 plus 3 is -2. A cube root of 6 plus 2 is 8. The cube root of 8 is 2. So I could just write down -2 equals a times 2. So it looks like a is -1. -1 equals 8. So that's what I would put for my final answer. Negative. And you can put like -1, or you can just put the negative symbol by itself. Negative cube root of x plus 2 minus 3. So pause for questions. Okay, before we do number 2, I just want to clarify. So number 1 was called a cube root function because the graph looks sideways like this. So your equation would be a cube root. Sometimes kids get confused. So on the quiz, you might see a cube root function like this, which is a sideways graph. Or depending on which version of the quiz you get, you might see a graph that's vertical, like it looks like this, up and down, like vertical. That's a cubic function. So this thing here is a cubic. So if you were to write the equation of that graph, like a vertical graph, then it would be the one that's y equals a x minus c cubed plus d. I just wanted to make sure I said that in class because sometimes kids get confused and they'll just switch them around somehow. So again, depending on which version of the quiz you get, if your graph is sideways like this, left and right, that would be called a cube root. But if your graph is vertical, up and down, that would be called a cubic, and you would be, again, you would be solving for A because we can just ignore B. x minus c cubed plus d. C and D is still the inflection point. So number one, you'll definitely see something like that on the quiz next week. Next, number two, you'll definitely see something like that on the quiz next week. And I think these will be the hardest ones because the rest are just multiple choice, pretty easy. So let's do something like number two. If f of x is the negative 6 cube root of x minus 3 plus 2, and the following transformations are applied on f of x, find the new equation g of x. So again, we did it last time when we did cubics. Now let's do it again with cube roots. So here's what I do when here's how I work these questions. I like to take all of these transformations that are listed and convert them into an equation. So that means that I'm going to take all of these transformations, I'm going to write them right here. G of x equals, okay, I'm going to write a negative 3/2 because a reflection over the x-axis and a vertical stretch by 3/2, you would write negative 3/2. So I've done that. Okay, now here's where it gets tricky. A horizontal compression by 1/2, so that's a horizontal transformation. So that means that that's going to be inside of the function. So here's how I do it. I'm going to, instead of putting the cube root, which is the function, I like to put just the letter f, like f of x. And then horizontal compression by 1/2, that's going to be a 2. Because with the x transformations, they're always just kind of tricky. So you would put a 2 inside of the function f, and that is considered a horizontal compression by 1/2. And then you still need to be careful with these horizontal transformations, because now let's do horizontal translation to the right 2. Okay, to the right 2 means I need to do x minus 2 in parentheses. So this is why it's tricky. I need to put it like x minus 2 in parentheses. If you don't put the parentheses, then you end up with the wrong shift. So x minus 2, that would be to the right 2. And then there's one last transformation, vertical translation up 4. So let me just do, squeeze it here, plus 4. And I always just like to go back and double check that I did them right. So once I think I have the equation, I go back and list each transformation. So negative 3/2 is outside the function, so that is an a value, which is reflection over the x-axis, vertical stretch by 3/2. Good, I've done it right so far. Next, there's a 2 inside of the f of x function, so that's a horizontal. And although it's a 2, you do the reciprocal. So horizontal compression by 1/2. So that's correct. I did it right. Moving on, the x minus 2, that's a shift to the right 2. So confirming that I did it right. Finally, the plus 4 is a vertical shift up 4. Okay, so that was the hard part. After that, you're just going to do what we keep doing with the just some algebra. So here's how you do it now. To get your answer of g of x, we first have to find this f of 2 parentheses x minus 2. So let's try that first. Let's go ahead and find f of 2x minus 4. I want to get rid of some of the parentheses because there's too many there. So instead of putting 2 parentheses x minus 2, let's go ahead and just write it as 2x minus 4. That's still a translation to the right 2. Okay, so then what you need to do is, let's go ahead and figure out what is f of 2x minus 4 by taking the 2x minus 4 and plugging it in the f function. So in other words,
excuse me, do you need any more of this? It's hand sanitizer.
Let me see. I think the jar's still pretty full, no?
Oh,
I think I'm okay, thank you.
okay.
All right, so let's do it. Let's take this 2x minus 4 and plug it in for x in the f function. So in other words, this is going to equal to negative 6 cube root of x minus 3. But instead of putting x, you're going to replace x with this 2x minus 4. So 2x minus 4. And then minus 3 plus 2. So let's simplify this. So let's go ahead and simplify what is f of 2x minus 4 by combining anything we can. So it's going to be negative 6 cube root of 2x minus 7 plus 2. 2x minus 7 plus 2. Okay. Now, that's not the final answer, because for your final answer, you need to take the answer that we just got, and you have to multiply by negative 3/2 and add 4 to it, because that's what the final answer, that's what g of x is. And I need you to take this answer that we just got, which was the f of 2x minus 4, multiply by negative 3/2 and add 4 to it. So let's write it down. I don't know why I keep switching colors, but okay. So we're going to take this answer, negative 6 cube root of 2x minus 7 plus 2. I am going to multiply by negative 3/2 and add 4 to it. Okay, now that's going to give us my final answer. So this is going to be g of x. Okay, so now just do some simplifying, and this is going to be the final answer. So to simplify this, let's go ahead and multiply negative 3/2 times negative 6, and then negative 3/2 times 2. So g of x equals negative 3/2 times negative 6 is, no, thank you, positive 9 cube root of 2x minus 7. Negative 3/2 times positive 2 will be a negative 3. And then there's a little plus 4 at the end. So your final answer will just have, I guess, a minus 1 at the end. So let me put my final answer in the blank here. 9 cube root of 2x minus 7, and then a plus 1 at the end. So that's the final answer. And let me pause for questions. And that's what you'll need for the quiz Tuesday. So now we're going to move on to our 10.4 lesson, which is called solving cube roots. They're going to be easier than the square roots because cube roots have like all real number for the domain, so we don't have to check for extraneous solutions. They'll just be easier to do. So here's how you solve a cube root function. Step 1, isolate the cube root. So I guess, should I put the steps here? Step 1, isolate the root. And then next you're going to, well, let's just do one step at a time. Example 1. Let's go ahead and isolate the root, which was cube root of x minus 2. So I'm going to do minus 4. So 2/3 cube root of x minus 2 equals 6 minus 4 is 2. Next, to isolate the root, I just got to get rid of this 2/3 here. And I'm gonna get rid of the 2/3 by multiplying the left and the right by the reciprocal of 2/3. So in other words, 3/2. Because if you multiply 2/3 times 3/2, that goes away. And then on the other side, if you multiply 2 times 3/2, that becomes 3. So that's step 1, isolate the root. Step 2 is just to cube both sides of the equation so that you can get rid of the root. So let me write it down here. Step 2, cube both sides. So that's what I'm going to do. I am going to cube, and by cube I mean raise to the 3rd power, the left side of the equal sign, and then I'm going to cube the right side of the equal sign. And the cube root will cancel with that cubic, so you're just left with x minus 2. And then you need to know that 3 to the 3rd is 3 times 3 times 3, so 27. Finally, just solve for x. So I guess last step, simplify. I don't know. Simplify. Okay, so to simplify here, just add 2 to both sides. So x equals 29. And like I said earlier, there's no need to check for extraneous solutions because cube roots always have all real numbers. So that's it. Perfect, done. And that's how we're going to do the rest of these. The last thing you need to know about these solving cube roots is this notation here. Anytime you see an x raised to the 1/3 power, We're going to do a whole section, or actually a whole unit on these fractional exponents, but all you need to know for now is when you have an exponent of a 1/3, that's the same thing as the cube root of x. You need to know that. I guess I never mentioned it last semester, but last semester, you know how we were doing like the square root of x, which is a little 2? That would have been x to the 1/2. But that's not on the quiz or test. We'll come back to that. There's a whole unit that we're going to spend on that. For now, all you need to know is if you see x raised to the 1/3 power, that means that it is the cube root of x. So let's do number 2 by rewriting it as 3 minus 3 cube root of x equals negative 12. So notice how I only put the x in the cube root because only the x is being raised to the 1/3 power. Sometimes kids want to put like the other 3 inside, but that it would have looked like this. It would have looked like parentheses 3x to the 1/3. Like if it was written in this way, like parentheses 3x to the 1/3, that means the cube root of 3x. But that's not what we have here. Here we have a 3, and then we have an x only that is being raised to the 1/3 power. Okay, so now go ahead and follow the steps I showed you. Step 1, isolate the root. Step 2, cube both sides. Step 3, simplify the thing. So you do that while I erase this. Okay. Isolate the root. I'm going to do minus 3. Negative 12 minus 3 is negative 15. Still, isolate the root. So I'm going to divide by negative 3. Negative 15 divided by negative 3 is 5. And finally, cube both sides. And final answer, x equals 125. If there's any questions at any time, please just raise your hand and let me know. If not, we can just keep going. Okay, try example 3. Example 3. Let me pause for questions. Example 3. Solving a cube root. Step 1, isolate the root. The great news is that the cube root of x is already isolated. So step 2 is cube both sides. So let's do that. The cube root of x cubed becomes regular x equals x cubed. So now it's like, okay, what do we do now? So now what you'll do after you've done after you've cubed both sides, if you do end up like a cubic, like Sanjita just asked, if you end up with a cubic like this, we're going to solve them by factoring. So solve by factoring. Factoring. So if you do end up with a cubic, like x to the 3rd, we're just going to solve these by factoring. The steps to solve by factoring is step 1, set the equation equal to 0. Set equation equal to 0. So let's do that. Let me move the x over. So 0 equals x cubed minus the x. Step 2, just factor. Factor. So here, x cubed minus x does factor because for starters, there's a GCF of x. Since the first term has an x cubed, and then you have a minus x, we need to factor an x out. So it would look like this. 0 equals x, parentheses, x squared minus 1. So what I ended up doing was I took x cubed, and I took that in x, so I was left with x squared. And then I did my x, when you take out an x, you're ending up with a 1. So now I have x parentheses, x squared minus 1. We still need to keep factoring. That's not factored all the way. So let's do 0 equals x. X squared minus 1 should be factored as x minus 1, x plus 1. So now that we have the whole thing completely factored, we can set each factor equal to 0. You'll know what to do? Okay. So step 3, set each factor equal to 0 and solve. Set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So in other words, let me start with my first factor. My first factor is x. So x equals to 0. Good thing is that that's already solved. My next factor is x minus 1. So let's set it equal to 0 and solve by doing plus 1. Finally, my last factor is x plus 1. Set it equal to 0 and then solve. So then that would be x equals negative 1. So let's see if you understood what I just said and try example 3 by yourself. Example 3 by yourself. I'm going to pause for questions. Okay, so hopefully you're trying example 4 by yourself. I'm going to do it very quickly here. And if you're done with example 4 and you got nice answers, then that's probably right to move on to example 5. Cube it. X cubed equals 4x squared of x. X cubed minus 4x squared minus 5x. You should be getting like nice answers because that's what I chose for your test. I don't have enough room, so let me put over here. X. Okay, so example 4, here's what you should have gotten for your answers. X equals 0, that's one of the answers. X equals positive 5, that's another answer. I skipped a step and that's okay. Final one would be x equals negative 1, and that's okay. So now try example 5, same thing. Isolate the root, which is already isolated. Cube both sides. So example 5, those cube roots were useless. They were just there to throw you off, I guess. Example 5 is just going to be x squared minus 2x equals 3x plus 5. So on example 5, if you just get rid of those cube roots, you end up with x times x minus 2. So here it is, x squared minus 2x equals 3x plus 5, and then just repeat the process. Set the equation equal to 0, factor, and solve. So x squared minus 5x plus 5. So I know I didn't put anything like this one on the test because this one doesn't factor, so it's really hard to type an answer down. So in other words, if you try to factor this one, it will not factor nicely, which is all the ones that I gave you on your test will factor to nice integers. So this, since it doesn't factor, you're supposed to still solve this, but we did it last semester with like the quadratic formula or the completing the square. Wait, should this plus 5 be a minus 5?
Yes.
Oh, is that what you're trying to tell me? I couldn't hear because the hand dryer was going off. Okay. Thank you. It still won't factor. So because it won't factor, you're supposed to use the quadratic formula. So let me just tell you what you should have done, like x equals negative b plus or minus the square root. But if you want to make a note, just cross it out. It's not on the test this semester. Negative b plus minus b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. So I'm just going to cheat and look at the answer key. According to the answer key, the answer would have been 5 plus or minus 3 square root of 5 over 2. So again, I didn't put those on the test this semester because all the answers should be nice integers. But that was how you would do number 5. And then let's finish the last 2, and then I can just answer any questions you might have about any of the stuff we've done. The last 2 examples are number 6 here. Solve for x. Okay, so for this one, before you start isolating the root, there's 2 cube roots, but they're like terms because you have cube root of 4x and cube root of 4x. So you can think of those as like a variable. Like if you had 3y plus 2y, you can just add them together and it would be 5y. So that's what I'm going to do. 3 cube root of 4x plus 2 cube roots of 4x end up being 5 cube roots of 4x. So if you do see something like that on the test, they're going to be like terms, and then you just need to combine them together. After that, Now you just follow the stuff. Isolate the root. So let me divide by 5. 10 divided by 5 is 2. Cube both sides. So that gives me 4x equals 8. Because 2 to the third power is 8. And then final answer, x equals 2. So that's how you solve cubics, or cube roots, I'm sorry. You'll need it for the test. And that's how you do it. I think I only put like 1 or 2 of these. And then this is a word problem. I really don't think I put word problems on the test, but we're still going to do it just because we're still going to teach it. But yeah, I don't think I put I don't think I put any word problems for your test. However, let's just do this one for fun. Example 7. A car company finds that the equation that relates the sales and costs are the following. So this is how many sales this car company has, and this is how much it's costing them, I guess, to make the cars. You need to find the break-even point. If at this point, if you still haven't heard about break-even point, that's when like your sales equals your expenses. Or in other words, like if you own a business, how much you sell equals how much it costs you to make the business run, then you're breaking even. If you do own a business, you don't just want to break even, you want your sales to be more than the cost so that you can actually make money, like a profit. But right now it just says find the break-even point. So in other words, when does the cube root of 15u, let's just change it to u, minus 13, when does that equal the cube root of 8u plus 2? So isolate the cube root, which is already isolated, cube both sides. So again, those cube roots were just useless. It's just 15u minus 13 equals 8u plus 2. And now solve for u. 7u equals 15. So I guess the break-even point would have been like this 15/7. But if you actually want to write in context of this problem, I think u was cars. Yeah, u is the cars. So 15/7 is like 2.1 something cars, which technically like you can't make a 0.1 of a car. So let's go ahead and go with like round up to 3 cars. And the reason why we're going to round up is because if you round down like just to only 2 cars, then that's not enough cars to make this equal to each other. So let's make it at least 3 cars, and now the company has actually broken even and made a profit. So pausing or stopping.